right, there we go. Good morning, everyone. We are delighted to be here today. We have a terrific panel with us, and just wanted to spend a couple minutes, I think this is moderator's prerogative, to just kind of frame this conversation that we're about to have. This is the panel on developing the pillars of the Indiana-Illinois innovation ecosystem, and how Argonne thinks about the framework of innovation is fundamentally in 4 pillars. First, starting with community engagement. We need to engage communities at the start, not at the end of the innovation life cycle. And we really need to be inclusive in making sure that all communities benefit from the growing economy. The second pillar is science, technology, and engineering. Of course, we want to be on the forefront of science and technology and engineering. I think we are here in Illinois and Indiana. And this also includes the infrastructure that we have. You heard Paul Kearns talk about how Argonne has the Advanced Photon Source and Aurora, our exascale computer, which is #1 in the world for AI. That's just to name a few. There's a lot of investments happening. The third pillar, partnerships and technology transfer, and not thinking about the traditional partners, but pulling in the non-traditional partners. Community colleges, nonprofits, small businesses are really important for the growth. And the fourth pillar of workforce development. We have to invest in the future workforce. We have to invest in people. This is scientists and researchers, the students that are really going to help us grow the economy. All require investment, all 4 of those pillars. And underpinning these pillars is culture. And we can't forget about the importance of culture. So that's the inclusive environment that students expect, that our excellent researchers want to be able to do their best. And also a culture that has shared values among partners. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to, I've got some wonderful questions here with a wonderful group of panelists. I would like to start with Mira, who is doing great things with Innovate Illinois, which you'll hear a little bit more about. Really, how are leaders in Indiana, Illinois, and across the Midwest rethinking traditional models to support state, local, and regional innovation hubs?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be up here today. I'm going to echo some of the points that Chancellor Jones made in the earlier panel about Innovate Illinois, but I kind of want to start with that as a model of how we're thinking about this. So Innovate Illinois, as Chancellor Jones said, is sort of our initiative through the governor's office to think about how are we coordinating around these very large federal initiatives coming out of the new industrial policy. And the thing about those, I think, and sort of the shift that we're seeing, that we're all seeing taking place is things are a bit more place-based now, right? Like it is very obvious. I'm saying nothing new that none of you know. But when you think about regional place-based innovation, you really need to think about how that region is coming together. It's no longer about a single university or a state or a city or anyone like that, but it's really about how do we all sort of come together to drive innovation and move the needle. And I think that's something that's really unique and exciting that's happening right now, and Innovate Illinois is driving some of that work. Part of that is just, it's very exciting because how fun is it to think about bringing you and sort of 20 of your most thoughtful friends to the table to figure out an answer? Like, that's really exciting, right? But then also, it's a bit about planning that ahead of time, because I think to your question, to like specifically address the part about how is this different and unique and how are we changing these models, I think oftentimes a grant comes together, you find these friends, you put the grant in, right? Or an initiative comes up, you pop in and do it. But imagine if that infrastructure and that coordination existed and you have that cohort already built. So as these things come up, you all can start to call each other and say, hey, we have this opportunity. How can we be the most competitive? How can we be the most helpful, right? In this, we're not all good at everything. How can we all come together and think about where are we uniquely positioned to sort of drive the impact, drive the needle? And so I think that's one of the really exciting things that's happening right now.
Terrific, thank you. And Adam, what policies and partnerships really are foundational to driving the place-based innovation economy?
Yeah, well, I think you have to more or less start at identifying what the goal is. and then base the partnerships on who are the best folks to come together to accomplish that goal. I mean, you can think back to a large goal being to establish a Midwest EV network. So Rev Midwest, the states came together to form an EV network and as part of the Jobs Act initiative. But coming from the State Chamber of Commerce, entities that are near and dear to my heart are your local chambers of commerce. And every region, every city, every community is different. And so when you're talking about placemaking, you need to identify what are the strengths of a particular community, and then invest and rely on the leaders within that community, your chambers, your local economic development organizations, to come together and put together a strategic plan, which is part of the READY initiative that the Indiana legislature has passed. It's $1 billion initiative, but it relies on the locals coming together to identify what's critical to the community, what's going to attract talent, attract business, attract investment, and then you work from there.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Christopher, who likes to go by Toph, so I'm going to be referencing him as Toph. So Toph, you, as the CEO of Elevate Ventures, I'm really interested in really what you're seeing in terms of investments in infrastructure, technology that are really helping to shape this Illinois-Indiana ecosystem and the corridor of investments happening here.
So thank you, Megan. So I think before we can even get to investments, I want to touch on culture and culture change and mindset. So there are some things we heard up here this morning. I think the chancellor said beyond silicon. We heard words like density. We heard words like collaboration. I think we have the president of IU here, President Whitten somewhere in the audience today. These are very intentional actions of people, organizations, universities, companies, et cetera, of coming together, because if people don't come together and build things, then we can't invest in anything. So I want to touch on something high level. There's a phenomenon called the productivity boom that global economists talk about. And basically, if you boil it down, the productivity boom is about the disruption of data and technology with all sectors faster than ever. And they believe that the epicenter of this phenomenon is going to occur in the middle corridor of the United States. Indiana, Illinois, we are smack dab in the middle of that epicenter. In fact, I believe we are the epicenter. And in fact, I believe that we are actually the innovation capital of the world. I think the world just doesn't know it yet. And so this word silicon heartland, this is my soapbox for a moment. Silicon is so 1960s. We're silicon nothing, nor should we strive to be silicon anything, right? The future is not silicon. So let's just drop that. And so what are we, right? I don't know, right? We have to figure that out with our own cities, our own regions, et cetera. A phrase I use is called innovation capital of the world. But if you look at infrastructure, talent, mission-critical industries, technology, lifestyle, cost of living, regulatory environment, that's where our strengths are, I think, in this middle corridor. And I won't rattle off the number one in top 5 rankings we have in this region of several hundred miles, but it is second to none. We invest in pre-seed, seed, Series A, cross-sector, so software, hard tech, healthcare, ag tech, food tech, sports tech, med tech, you pick a tech, we're in it. $20,000 to $2 million are typical investments throughout that cycle, up to $8 million in a given company. We've made over 600 investments, current portfolios over 400 companies. We are the number 1 most active investor in the Great Lakes region, number 2 in the country, and number 15 in the world at that early stage. And we manage a $225 million evergreen fund. The state of Indiana, I'll speak on Indiana specifically for a moment, has never had a growth stage fund. So all this stuff we're talking about here, and by the way, I'm a recovering entrepreneur. 8 businesses over 27 years, 7 verticals. And so we have never had a growth stage fund in Indiana. And so all of the incredible things we do, we talk about keeping talent here. We must launch a growth stage fund. and we're getting ready to do just that. Indiana's first growth stage fund will be a $150 million fund that'll focus on Series B and beyond. But right now, in the middle quarter of the United States, we are all really good at something that we should not be, and that's called the exportation of wealth. And so we take all the risk. And when those companies grow up and the winners of the winners grow up, and they're now doing $7, $8, $9, $10 million in revenue, and they need 10, 20, 50, $100 million in growth capital, we call our friends on the coast to come invest in our winners of winners. I'm not proposing that we displace the capital sources on the coast, but I am proposing, or not proposing, we are going to do it. We are going to participate with them, and that recycles more capital. Success begets success. And so those types of things did not exist 27 years ago, nor did the understanding of it, I think, exist 10 years ago. I think in the last 3 to 5 years, when we think about cross-sector and disparate stakeholders that make the world go round, I think people are starting to understand that requirement.
Terrific. And we heard it here, innovation capital of the world. That's what we are. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the investment in the workforce. And Brooke, I know you play a critical role here for Purdue. And how do you really see, who the key stakeholders are and what really needs to be done to create that workforce of the future that's required to advance the fields of chips, qubits, and molecules?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Megan. So obviously at Purdue and Illinois and our other research institutions, we play a pivotal role. Our faculty, our staff, our students, we are creating the workforce of the future. And two really key examples I can think of coming out of Purdue that are near and dear to my heart. Pluvicto. So Pluvicto is a radiopharmaceutical compound that was developed by a professor here at Purdue, Dr. Phil Lau. He filed an invention disclosure a number of years ago, and at Purdue Innovates, the Office of Technology Commercialization, we were able to patent that and license it to a startup company called Endocyte that was located out at the research park. That company was acquired by Novartis for about $2.1 billion in 2018, and the compound got FDA approval in 2022. We were able to monetize that royalty stream, and the rest has been history. But the reason why I bring Pluvicto up is because of the unique workforce development opportunity it provided our students. So many of you may or may not know, but Novartis has a production facility down in Indianapolis for this radiopharmaceutical Pluvicto. And they're going to be expanding soon, they announced as well. But Purdue has I saw Eric Barker here earlier and was asking him some questions about it, but we are identifying regions and strengths at Purdue with these strategic companies that we can double down on and provide that workforce for. So one of the things with Pluvicto was it had it was a well-known issue at the time. They had a supply issue. And so how could they manufacture more of this drug to meet that clinical demand? And so Purdue is stepping up and providing a master's for radiopharmaceutical programs that will hopefully be able to fill some of that shortage and provide that workforce development for the pharmaceutical industry down in Indianapolis. The second one is SK Hynix Semiconductors. So you heard many speakers this morning talk about semiconductors at Purdue. And us doubling down with SK Hynix and being able to train the next workforce with Purdue and Ivy Tech and getting those students placed in those jobs to fill that gap in those 1,000 jobs that are coming to this area is going to be a key role, as well as online workforce development. So SemiU at Purdue, being able to take courses on semiconductors and training that next workforce. I see Dr. Mark Lundstrom over there, and he could give this talk much better than I can, but I know it's a big focus of ours, and it's a role that Purdue and other universities in the Midwest are stepping up.
Excellent. Thank you, Brooke. And Adam and Mira, do you have thoughts on what we need to do to really invest in the workforce?
Sure, I'll weigh in, but I feel a little self-conscious talking about workforce with Dr. Sue Ellsworth in the room, who has dedicated her professional life to workforce at Ivy Tech and elsewhere. I'll touch briefly on remote workers because it's very clear that, especially post-pandemic, that the remote worker is really the current trend, and will continue to be a trend. And in 2022, the Chamber led a legislative initiative so that local governments can identify surplus funds within their hundreds of budgetary accounts that they have. A lot of those funds are dedicated funds that really never get used. They just keep accumulating cash, and then they just sit there. I encourage you to look at a local budget sometime. It's amazing how many accounts they have, and the lack of change over the years. So what we did with the help of the General Assembly was pass a bill that said that local governments can identify surplus unused funds and transfer them into a workforce retention and recruitment fund that local government can then use to market itself, as I was mentioning earlier, marketing the assets of that community, or they can use the funds to actually write cash incentives to talent that they want to recruit into that community. A community might have the need for a certain type of physician. Well, they can go out, identify that physician that they want to recruit into that community and use the money in the fund to attract that individual. But again, I start off talking about remote workers because you're seeing a lot more communities. There's a company called Make My Move that's working really closely with our Indiana Economic Development Corporation. They've attracted almost 1,000 remote workers to the state of Indiana over the last 3 years through these types of incentive packages. So I view that as a key part of the workforce of the future, and there are opportunities that maybe people just don't know about that can be leveraged to attract those individuals. And the economic impact that they bring to a community is far out, surpasses the investment that it requires to bring them into that community.
That's really interesting. I mean, we hear about, right, the venture capital funds and the investment there. Department of Energy has their technology commercialization fund, but to have a workforce development fund. Wow, that's really excellent. Mira, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it sort of based on what you said at the very beginning, right? When workforce can't be an afterthought here. It has to come in right at the beginning. And I think that's someplace we have a huge opportunity on with quantum. Quantum technologies are brand new. We know they're going to need a massive workforce. It is both a really exciting opportunity and a huge responsibility for us to make sure that we're building it in a way that we have multiple pathways coming into it. We are thinking about where we're recruiting from, how people can get into those training programs. And a couple of different ways that we're thinking about it is through the Illinois Quantum Microelectronics Park, which you all heard about this morning from Chancellor Jones, and through our tech hubs. And so both of those have such a strong Illinois-Indiana connection. IQMP is on the south side of Chicago, a stone's throw away from the Indiana border, as we've said and many of you have said. And so how are we thinking about there as that's being built up? What are the different job opportunities there? Obviously, we're going to need a lot of scientists. Scientists are great. I'm a lab scientist. Love us, love them. But not always the most inclusive pathway in or the quickest pathway. And so how can we think about what the timeline is for those jobs coming in? Is it construction? Is it software? Is it or management? Is it business? What is it, and how can we build those pathways in? And how can we think about sort of recruiting from the communities in that area, both in Illinois and Indiana? Similarly, with the tech hubs, there's a huge opportunity. So Illinois was named a quantum tech hub. We have a quantum tech hub designation. And if for those of you who are familiar with the EDA Tech Hubs program, the geographic area is an MSA, which is a metropolitan statistical area. The Chicago MSA includes a whole big portion of Northwest Indiana, which is really exciting. And so one of the really exciting things that we put into that proposal was around workforce development. And so what we wrote into that proposal is to develop the largest community college-led quantum training program. And that allows us to take our city colleges, which are our Chicago community colleges, look at our suburban community colleges, but then also partner with like Ivy Tech, who have been integral in thinking through how can we make sure that curriculum is built across what's needed in both regions and bring people in. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in innovative ways we can think about it to bring both local communities and Indiana and Illinois together.
Great, yeah, innovative and very inclusive. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about technological disruption, right? And how that's really required to be able to compete in a global marketplace. So Toph and then Brooke, would love your thoughts on this particular. How do we drive that? What leadership is needed to really get that technological disruption that's required to be competitive?
Food, water, and shelter. So those used to be the three things that were required, right, for us to survive. I think there's a fourth now, and it's IP. And I think it requires us managing by fact. I think it requires us to be willing to be honest. Would you, in your personal life, would you continue to be friends with and trade with people who steal stuff from you? Literally, our food supply, our water supply, these things are going to become so critical. That's number one. Another thing I think about, which I think marries with this question with workforce, is NASA did a study in the 1960s, I believe it was. They wanted to go find creative geniuses. They wanted to find their future workforce. And so they came up with a study, and they started administering that study to a group of 1,700 kids at 5 years old. And they found out that 98% of those kids were creative geniuses. They kept testing those kids throughout their lives all the way into adulthood at 25 years old. 2% of those 25-year-olds were considered creative geniuses. We are good at sucking the creative genius out of our kids. And so if we are going to want to have a workforce that can actually meet the challenge of what is ahead, we've got to disrupt everything we do starting at ground zero, right? How we grow our food. Is synthetic food good for us? I don't know, maybe it's not, right? How do we track our food supply? How do we protect and track our water supply? How do we think about clean power, like nuclear fusion? Maybe it's time to come back and think about that. So I think we've really got to be open and honest with each other from everything top to bottom, from cradle to grave, as they say, and ask ourselves, are the things that we've been doing since the 1960s, are those things actually the right things that we should do kind of for the next 50 or 100 years?
Excellent. I'm a little scared because my kids are way beyond 5, so I don't know if I've messed them up or... Okay, Brooke, over to you and technological disruption.
Yeah, well, so mine are 1.5 and 4, so I still have a chance to not suck it out of them. But yeah, so Toph touched on IP, and I think that's a key driver, right? What can we do on the intellectual property front? But not only get the IP, but make sure it gets commercialized and actually utilized into products on market. So at Purdue Innovates, Purdue University received about 450 invention disclosures last year. That's a lot of new ideas coming from this campus and the faculty and the students. And figuring out how can we get those to the market, that's what's really where the rubber's gonna meet the road, right? We wanna make sure that it makes an impact, not only in the research lab and in publications and get the patent secured, but also figuring out how can we partner with companies and startups and entrepreneurs and venture capitalists to get those ideas out to the market. And so when you think about those 450 or so invention disclosures, we filed about 800 patent applications last year, and we were ranked 4th in the United States for number of issued patents coming from a university. And if President Mung was still sitting here, I know he would say that was behind number 1, the California system, number 3, the Texas system, and MIT was number 2. So we're very proud of that, but at the same time, we gotta make sure those innovations make it to the market and disrupt, right, what the current norms are. And so when you think about all that innovation happening here, we licensed about 250 of those technologies last year. And so we're always trying to find those next partners that are willing to take the risk of early stage technology. And so anything we can do to continue to disrupt the current norms, but investing in early stage technology and helping de-risk that valley of death, right? Because that groundbreaking research is happening here. We created something about 1.5 years ago called our incubator, which is focusing on Purdue technology, Purdue connected technology, and trying to find those killer experiments that will help propel that technology readiness level up, so that it does de-risk the technology, so that innovators and entrepreneurs and partners with corporations can happen, and they can take the risk on licensing that and try to get a product to market. So I think anything we can do to double down on that early stage innovation and that translation is going to be key.
I have to agree with that wholeheartedly. We're kindred spirits because I have the commercialization function that I steward on behalf of the National Lab. So it's a really, really critical function, and the investment that we've had from Department of Energy in that function has really helped us progress there. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Adam. I really want to hear about this, the innovation ecosystem. We've got people, community members, part of this innovation ecosystem that may not relate to being part of the STEM workforce or have the understanding or the education to really jump right in. So what really should we be thinking about what can we all be doing to bring the community in, bring people into the conversation, make sure that they're part of the growing innovation ecosystem when it's around very technical topics?
Well, there's a lot there, but I think where we need to start is understanding that innovation, entrepreneurship, new business creation, let's say it is tech company or a tech entrepreneur, the economic impact to that community is substantial. And so, that helps the coffee shop, that helps the local magazine publication. So just because there is, a focus on tech investment and tech entrepreneurship specifically, there needs to be an understanding that, that is a ship that rises, or whatever the phrase is, rises all ships, or tide there is
Rising tide
you know what I'm
floats all
trying to say.
boats.
Right, yeah, there you go. But the other thing too is we just need to think about, people within a community need to tell their story. I mean, I think there is probably mostly Indiana audience here, and I hear all the time, Indiana's at a disadvantage because you can't ski in Indiana, or we don't have beaches. But I mean, that's...
Yes, we do. We have
You have
45
beaches.
miles of beach.
But that's not true. We do. We have beaches, and you can ski in Indiana. And there's, Brown County, Indiana, there's just $1.5 million dollar investment to relocate a fiber headquarters there. I mean, there are so many parts of our region that draw a different audience. I mean, when I was growing up in Evansville, Indianapolis to me was the big city. And I thought, well, it'd be cool to live in Indianapolis someday. Well, people who are in Indianapolis, they think Chicago's the big city. There are people who love Indianapolis, love Evansville, love Chicago, love Momence, Illinois. My in-laws have property there, and there's just something in this region for everyone. We just don't do a good enough job marketing that to folks outside of the Midwest.
Great, thank you, Adam. And the Illinois perspective on this, Mira.
I love your Indiana beaches, so thank you for that. No, I agree. I think it ties really well into the previous workforce conversation. All this, sort of what you were saying, Toph, also as to who are we thinking about when we do all of this, right? Who are the voices at the table? What is the representation that you're seeing? There's so many different places that I think sometimes small groups get together and make these decisions, and it just doesn't feel relevant to communities or the people on the ground. And especially when you're thinking about some of these as communities or regions, who is going to be the end user of that technology? It's really going to be that resident. And so how do we get those resident voices in, and not just at a meeting or something like that, but really how are they able to shape pieces of that, both from the very early stages of, okay, well, this is how it's going to come into your community. How are we going to learn about it? What if we have an issue, who do we go talk to? Is there a place we can find regular updates? And then if there's a piece of it that we can test or be a part of or have a voice in, how do we get in there? And I think all of those things are so important, and they're sort of wrap around to the technology, but they're super relevant. And then thinking also along those lines of, as people start to see themselves as a part of that technology and users of that technology, and see how it's being affecting the community and the jobs and things like that, giving a path to get into that space as well. And so I think there's just so much around the technology and that ecosystem that you need to think about that's super important.
Can I mention something? So, all right, so I mentioned a NASA study a moment ago And so now this is an even more official study. It's called the TOEFL study. So starting about 11 years ago, I started asking my son and his friends like a whole bunch of just random questions after school. Literally, I started at kindergarten. And one of the questions I would ask him is, have you ever heard of STEM? What do you think about STEM? And in kindergarten, they would be like, like they would play with blocks. And then that would turn into they kind of heard of it. And then that turned into, yeah, I've heard of it, but that's for somebody else. That's only for these smart kids, these mathematician type kids. We are doing such a disservice to our children. Like literally we're 10 years away from needing this whole next batch of a workforce, right? And I think it used to be maybe called STEAM, I don't know, but the arts. But like literally if you're in a tech company, unless you're in super high tech, like some of the life sciences stuff those people are really, really smart. Not way smarter than I am. But like 20% of the jobs, maybe you get to 50% of the jobs require a skill set of these quote unquote smart people. You have operations, you've got finance, you've got customer success, you've got all of these roles to make a technology company go. And like back to the creative genius, like we're the adults. Remember, we're the 2% now that actually aren't that smart in how we teach things to our children. So I just a little self-reflection.
Sorry, I'm nodding super emphatically. I'd love to jump in. Some of you who know me have heard me talk about this. So I grew up in a STEM family. I was very lucky. My dad's a chemist. My uncle worked at Fermilab. My mom's a mathematician. I'm a chemist by training. No one told me this was hard growing up. Like literally, there was no point. I was very I understand how privileged that is, right? No one ever told me. It was just something we talked about every single day. It was something that happened. I went to school and some of it was hard, but history was hard too. Like all of it was hard, right? All of it was hard and all of it was easy at the same time. The first time anyone told me that chemistry was going to be hard was when I went into my freshman college class. And the professor, who was amazing, so no shame to the professor, came up and said, this is going to be one of the hardest things. You have to get up here. You have to work really hard. It's like, sure, whatever. But the look on people's faces and the number of people who dropped out because they were faced with the start of college, it was really hard, and someone just told them, you're probably gonna fail. And I fully agree. Like, I was so lucky not to have that, but I know how discouraging it can be when that exists.
Thanks for sharing that personal story. Okay, in the remaining time we have, I'm gonna use moderator's prerogative again, go off script here, with a question for each of you. In less than a minute, can you tell us one concrete recommendation that we should all be thinking about or doing to really propel this Illinois-Indiana innovation ecosystem? Who'd like to go first?
I want to go last.
I want to go first. Then I
Thanks,
don't have to
Mira.
think about what anyone else is saying. Can I give you two? Because I think there's one on the sort of partnership side, and there's one on the workforce people side. I think on the partnership side, I think we are all very, very good at a lot of different things. I think the way we can come together and be the best is really to think about what are we each uniquely good at and what do we bring to the table. I know that's hard. We all want to be a part of everything, but how can we all come together, bring our own unique strengths in, and work together to really be able to drive the nation, I think is something we can continue to think about and continue to refine. And then on the workforce side, I think we've talked about it a lot, but as this keeps moving, thinking about who's getting left behind. I think that's a really important question to continue asking ourselves.
Thanks, Mira. Adam or Brooke?
Paper, rock, scissors.
I'll go. So I think it goes back, I'm thinking of a day in probably the last 2 weeks or so. A Purdue alum came back to campus, and I really wish I could have recorded his level of energy and what he saw happening here, but he's out in the Silicon Valley, and he's working on a startup, and he made it very clear that he said, I want to make sure my workforce comes to Purdue, I want to be located next to Purdue, I want to do sponsor research with Purdue. And I think it just really hit home the point of, yes, he was a Purdue alum, he's probably a little biased, but I think a lot of our Midwest institutions would have a similar feeling, right, if your alum came back and saw the ecosystem that we're building here. So I think to one of your points, we got to continue to tell that story. We got to bring our alums back to the ecosystem, make sure they see what we're doing here, make sure they see Indiana, Illinois, the Midwest as a hotspot to locate a facility here, to locate a research partnership, to hire our students. And so I think it's not only a partnership play and kind of a marketing play, but it's an awareness and doing what we can to tap that network.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah, I think we just need to figure out what our goals are. I'm a big KPI guy, right? So let's figure out what the goals are. What are those key performance indicators that we can measure towards those goals of success? And I brought with me, not one for everybody, but the Indiana Chamber puts out, we did Indiana Prosperity 2035, which kind of is an economic playbook for the state. We did a report card in 2023 that I've stacked some copies over there for those who are interested. It just looks through a number of different metrics that we use to measure those goals. And, I think that sort of in preparation for today, kind of looking at sort of what are the strengths of Illinois, what are the strengths of Indiana, you'll see that Indiana has a net positive in migration. Illinois ranks 49th in terms of losing talent. So what is it that is driving folks away from Illinois and attracting them to Indiana? Not that we're complaining, but there are things that Illinois can learn from us about talent attraction and retention, but there are things that Indiana can learn from Illinois. I mean, Chicago has 1871 was the entrepreneurial sort of ecosystem started in Chicago. I mean, Indiana, Toph, I love Toph. I mean, he's done a lot of wonderful things for our entrepreneurial ecosystem, but we can never stop learning, right? So, and a quick shout out to the Manufacturing Readiness Grant Program in Indiana, where the state is putting forward matching grants for our small and mid-sized manufacturers to invest in streamlining some of their operations. And that now is a program that, one, is driving workforce and innovation in Indiana, but it's also serving as a model to folks like Illinois. So why not partner with Illinois in areas, not be afraid to share? I understand there's political implications and all that stuff, but just forget about all that. Let's create a tide that raises all boats. And we can do that together.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, Toph.
All right.
Closing us out.
So we've heard words like collaboration, we've heard density, we've heard beyond silicon, we've heard disparate stakeholders, like people from all walks of life, all occupations, et cetera, all these different things we've heard this morning. And I love every single one of them. It is spot on. And so we launched a festival called Rally, rallyinnovation.com, rallyinnovation.com. And nobody makes any money, by the way, off of Rally, right? It's nonprofit. So
Not a shameless plug.
right, yeah. So I don't make any money. Kristen doesn't. Landon over there doesn't make any money. But if it's in the black by $1, that gets pushed into the next year. The reason that we started Rally, which is rallyinnovation.com, we just had year 2, but we are building the world's largest cross-sector innovation festival. And the magic is when you bring cross-sector people together in one place at one time, couple that with disparate stakeholders, and insanity happens. Things that we never expect. Creative collisions, it's a real thing. Creative convergence, it's a real thing. And so we just had year 2. In year 1, we had about 3,000 people. Year 2, with even the satellite rally events, we had almost 4,000 people from well over a dozen countries, over 30 states, 4 Canadian provinces. It is insane. And so part of what we're all trying to do here, Indiana, Illinois, along with other Midwestern states, but part of what we're trying to do here is the other term I never liked was flyover states, right? Really? So I just think that flyover is used by the uninformed, lovingly. So, but if we come together, we can do this. We can put a spotlight on this kind of 2, 3, 4, 5 state region that I personally believe with every fiber in my body, it is the innovation capital of the world. The world just doesn't know it yet. And if we all collectively come together, Rally is for everybody. You want to get involved, you want to hold a conference within the conference, it's built to be a big umbrella We have, this year, I think we had 5 or 6 partners hold their annual summits or conferences at Rally. Credit is for everybody, right? Keep your brands, keep your everything. We have big contingencies from Chicago, came down. So Midwest House does a big deal there. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know if it's a shameless plug. I don't get anything out of it personally, but I just believe in our next generation with every fiber of my body.
Well, terrific. Let's do this. We are the innovation capital of the world, so here we go. Let's thank our panelists. Thank you all.